For those of you who don't know, I come from a country that doesn't exist anymore, USSR, and I spent the beginning of my life growing up in Soviet Russia. And I remember being a girl going to a shop with my parents and seeing shelves just with a little bit of products. There was one type of milk, one type of bread, one type of can of sardines, and maybe 2 types of sausages. The choice was easy, and we were happy as a family. Until I went to the America, where I went to a shop and I saw the abundance of choice. I could buy tens of different types of bread, tens of different types of milk and yogurt and whatnot. And then I was elated. I felt that was heaven on earth. I was so excited to buy all these products because they were available. I put on 10 kilos, but that's another story. And as I was looking at them and started browsing and choosing these products, I noticed that I was doubting my own choice. Whether the cheese that I've chosen is as good as the one that is still on the shelf, whether the bread that is there and is full of things that I'm not aware of, exotic fruit, maybe a bit more expensive and I need to work on it, but maybe it's best for me to buy that bread. And I had what we call now the emotional and cognitive overload. When I went back to Russia, to Soviet country still, I realized that these insights would help me also to understand the current environment of relationships and the landscape for the future of relationships. What's happening currently in our life is that 20 to 30% of dating is happening online, when we can swipe left or right with thousands of potential mating partners, and we choose sometimes none because of this abundance of choice. Now, this was very different thousands of years ago, before the marriage was created, when we were in savannas, in tribes, as hunters and gatherers, in groups of around 30 people, where a few men were leaders, women were shared, and children were all supported. By the way, both men and women worked. The majority of the plate that the family had on dinner was gathered by a woman. She would commute to work and come back with the produce. And only until the agrarian and farming civilization, and when the hunters and gatherers started to settle, that's when we saw the separation of roles and gender, where men would go generally to work and bring back money, and women would raise children and stay at home, and they would belong to the man. Actual marriage was invented around 4,000 years ago. It's a very recent institution. It was idolized by the Christianity and took the life of its own. And it was never a relationship endeavor. It was the economical and political institution to control who owns the cows when I die, who out of the children that I have, who are mine, and whether my wealth will go to a particular heir. Women had and still have the surname of their father until they are given to the man and they take the surname of the man as a property. For many, many centuries, women had no rights until very recently. No rights to vote, no rights to have money, no rights to make decisions, no rights to express their sexuality or even their wishes and desires. And what we see in the last less than 100 years, the women return to work, to have career, to have a contraceptive pill that was invented in 1961, when she could take the control of how she wanted to have that marriage to be done, how the relationships that were established during the marriage to be conducted, and then men and women still not equal. We will have probably another 200 years before the equality will happen, but we are going back, like in time, into the future. Interestingly, throughout the French Revolution, American Revolution, and if we look at broader spectrum, the Chinese culture, Indian culture, and generally Western cultures adopted the monogamy model of relationship. And to my surprise, and probably to yours, monogamy only accounts for 16% of all the cultures recorded on our planet. 84% of the marriages are not monogamous. They are either polygynous, when one man can have many wives, or polyandrous, when one woman can have many men, many husbands. Now, you might ask, what is the purpose and biological benefit for one woman to have many men? I was quite perplexed with that, because a man, I mean, we understand there's so many millions of sperm that he can spread around, and probably men had a license to roam for as long as we remember. And women we're not allowed, and still are not allowed, to exercise their freedom, especially sexually. Still in 9 countries around the world, women are killed for straying. 9 countries. This is shocking and horrible. Now, if we look at this polyandrous model of marriage, in countries like Tibet, I remember going on that 3-week walking journey with my husband Alex, where we met a woman in a Tibetan secret kingdom where she had many men married to her. And the question was, why? Now, the fertile land that family owned was very limited. And the answer was, if we share that land into pieces to our sons, they will not have sufficient produce to sustain a family. So all the brothers married one woman, and when they went hunting, she looked after common children with the help of other men. What an interesting idea. In a different society in Africa, a woman was asked, why would you have many men? It doesn't make any sense. And she would say, well, if you have a fisherman, you always have fish. If you have a fisherman or a meat eater or the jewelry maker, then you have different resources. Now that made sense. Of course, the polygyny we've seen for centuries. And as ranks of men were higher, like a Chinese king had thousands of women he could have a sexual relationship with, and also children, together with his wife, who was not allowed to have a single sexual relationship. Now, if we look at the current situation where we are, where we see a lot of changes in marriages, and they're quite bleak. I mean, if an Apple or a Microsoft company came to you and said, would you buy a product that's 50% faulty, and we know for sure it will break 1 in 2, 1 out of 2 will break, would you buy it? But that is a situation of a current marriage. Around 50% of marriages fail. Now, when I say fail, we actually don't know if it's a failure or if it's just a decision where both or one decide to have something better. Because it used to be that we would marry and we would start having sex. Now we marry and we stop having sex with others. We used to have monogamy for a lifetime. Now we call it serial monogamy, or we have monogamy in every relationship we're in. And we live twice as long. So of course, generally we have 2 or 3 marriages during our lifetime. Now, as we continue into the future, our lifespan will probably increase. We're looking at longevity studies. We're looking at health and vitality. And our lifestyle, of course, will impact how we build and nurture our relationships. We already see in youth such concepts as icing or simmering to extend and prolong the stage before marrying somebody, or ghosting, when we remove our responsibility for saying goodbye and disappearing. Now, what will happen with the future when some of our devices that are so essential, like a phone, which in a way is an extension, kind of a cyborg type extension of our personality, where we don't go anywhere without it, even to a bathroom. I wonder what type of important conversations we're having sitting on the loo. But that's gonna continue, and maybe not an external, but internal, nanobot or a chip that would impact the way how we connect. Look at us. We're sitting around like a virtual campfire, connected through this technology, listening to a young woman from Siberia. I mean, this would never have happened a few hundred years ago. And it will continue to happen as we're moving into this uncharted territory of relationship models that didn't exist, or they were undercurrent. They were secret before. Now we can talk about them. So it's not anymore heterosexual or bisexual or gay and lesbian. We're talking about the spectrum. We hear words like pansexual. What is that? Fluid gender. Where gender and sexuality were expressions of biology, now the expression of our identity. Where marriage was before the institution to support the offspring, our children. Now the marriage is an expression of our identity. I want one person who would satisfy my need for stability, security, variety, risk, who would be my great friend, confidant, who would be a great partner, a great parent, a great trustee, and we live twice as long. So the expectations on marriage are huge. And no wonder the marriage is crumbling down as an institution. The first-time marriage, generally in some countries like Belgium, the marriage divorce rate is 76%. In Spain, 68%. In the UK, 42%. In America, 44%, around 45%. Now, if you're first-time married, the likelihood of divorce is around 42%. Second-time married, around 60%. Third-time married, around 73%. These are statistics and facts that we need to look into, but also they will not go away in the future. Why? Because we long for love. We long to find that mating partner. I mean, look at the animal kingdom. Unfortunately, 97% of animals, they're not pair bonding animals, but there are like wolves or beavers or swans that are monogamous creatures, or penguins who are serial monogamous. They mate for the whole season to raise their offspring, and off they go next year to find a new partner. Now, it's a little bit more complicated for humans. Why is that? Because our offsprings are not easily, they're not independent until they're 20 plus. When they find their first job, it's our responsibility as parents to look after them. And it's not easy to be a single parent, not even easy to be a couple, because it used to be a village, a whole tribe to support the children. And now the responsibility, the weight is on our shoulders. Now that's a little bit about, what is the landscape of this future of relationship. But most importantly, I would like to share with you practical research-based tools, because I come from a scientific, practical, and skeptic background. Both of my parents are doctors and university professors, and I've learned that until I see the data, I'm a little bit skeptical about this whole notion. But there's a brilliant set of research by Dr. John Gottman and his institute in Seattle in America, where they did studies on newlyweds, and they put newlyweds in B&B kind of environment for a few days to see how they interact. And the idea was whether they could predict whether these couples would stay together or they would separate and divorce. After 20 years of research, and they published consistently, there was a fascinating discovery. So one of the factors, and by the way, they were not just sitting there as an Airbnb, they took their blood samples, saliva samples, urine samples, heart rate variability, galvanic response. The whole room was sound and video recorded, so they could see the facial expressions, they could see how they're reacting with their physiology. And when they put double screens to see how partners react to each other, they could predict with 95% accuracy whether these couples would stay together long-term or divorce. And the first 3 minutes of their interactions made the whole difference. So would you like to know what these were? So the first one, I cannot hear you, you're all muted, but that's fine because I'll just continue talking and then we will have a discussion, hopefully. So please think of your questions, type them in the chat and we'll pick them up afterwards. And the most interesting question will have a prize. I know you're very competitive, all of you. So let's look at what these research insights were. Number one is not even conflict. I mean, I thought, oh, you know, people who have a lot of fights and a lot of, you know, negative conflicts, they probably gonna divorce. No, those people could repair. But one very important predictor is what Dr. Gottman called bids for attention. These are little comments that wives and husbands, and by the way, they were not all heterosexual, they were lesbian and gay couples also in the study, but for the ease of the language, I'll just call he and she. So imagine they sit, and it's Seattle, they were on a lake, the bed and breakfast, and a husband would say, look, darling, you know, what a cool boat. And if a wife would say, yeah, can you please take the rubbish out? Can you help me with that? That's a negative kind of interaction. They coded negative. If she would say, yeah, it's a cool boat. It was neutral. When a wife would say, oh, darling, this is what a wonderful boat. Remember we went sailing the other day? Or she could say, oh, wouldn't it be fantastic if we just dropped everything and went on a boat like that? That was a positive interaction. So what they discovered, that the more positive interactions these couples had, the better they were into their marriage long term. And the ratio between negative and positive was quite astounding. It was not just 1 to 1, it was 5 times positive interactions to 1 negative. That is a fundamental learning, and I think we all can learn from this. Think about your own relationship, your marriage, or if you're single and looking for, or divorced or widowed, think about if you're making a new relationship, how can you start by sharing 5 positive interactions first? And for each negative, it could be, the positive interaction could be a hug, or it could be an act of service, it could be a gift, it could be a word, it could be anything that your partner likes. And that's another thing. Do you know what your partner appreciates and what kind of love language they have? Gary Chapman wrote a bestseller book called 5 Love Languages that we have, and we choose to love, and we feel loved differently depending on what our love language is. Now, another interesting research that gives us a clue about how to enrich our relationships into the future is the marriage satisfaction factor survey. Did you know that men have 2 factors that predict their marriage satisfaction? Number 1 is the amount of criticism. The less criticism, the fewer the criticism, the better for a man. And number 2 is sex, the amount. The more sex, the better the marriage for men, generally. For a woman, it's a completely different situation. For a woman, the satisfaction in the marriage, number 1, is whether she has an emotional bond, whether she can express her feelings and thoughts with her partner. And number 2, surprise, surprise, is whether her partner can share chores and activities to raise offspring. Completely different satisfaction factor, right? So as we're looking into the future and thinking whether the technology will make a difference, and by the way, it will. There's so many studies done on in the dating world, because online dating currently accounts for $3 billion, and some of the studies done by the Dr. Helen Fisher went into creating the algorithm to find better matches on Match.com and Chemistry.com, and the Match Group generally owns more than 60% of data on online dating sites. So we know a lot about love and the science of love. But the good news is we will always search for love. And we have three circuitry in each of our brains. There are three different types of love. That's something also very interesting to know. We have a circuitry for lust, that impulse to procreate, to mate, very sort of tactical, find the sort of sex drive and release. The second circuitry is romantic love. Romantic love is wired in our psychology and our biology. And when we are romantically in love with somebody, it's like our brain is on cocaine. It's what we want to possess and know everything about this person. And it's very different to the long-term attachment love, when we actually love the person and the hormone oxytocin is released, when we establish a long-term bond. Now, if we can combine all three circuitries and have that marriage with the person and exercise all three types of love with it, that's a perfect marriage. And what we know is that people who create marriages later on, when they become more educated, with better financial status, and they establish longer and more fruitful relationships. Now, institution of marriage, it may be a young institution, but it's still gonna last, because we all want to be loved, not just romantically, but also have that secure attachment with our beloved one, so we can create a fruitful environment for our children to thrive in, whether it's monogamous relationship, polygamous relationship, polyandrous relationship, anything in between. But what I would like you to learn from this brief talk is just to sort of create thirst and appetite, but also the practical tool, that 5-to-1 ratio that you can take home. And every time, especially nowadays in this pandemic, instead of focusing on the negative, think of 5 positive things that you can share with your partner. Never go to bed angry. That's a very simple one. Hug more, because when we hug and touch, we release the hormone oxytocin. That's a trust hormone that creates more that long-term bond and relationship love that we need to secure the attachment, to secure the bond. And monitor and become aware of those bits of attention, the little bits every day that matter. So I would like to leave you with this and open the floor for questions. And hopefully I'll answer and bring more research along with the questions that you have. But also, meanwhile, I'll see where you're from, and if you have any questions, please type. That's a good time now. Aisha, over to you. We have some questions.
Thank you, Darya. That was a fascinating talk. So very interesting statistics, and sad but true, but there's hope. So there, if certain things, are done. So, well, with that, I'll ask you, one question from one of the attendees, which is, my partner and I argue a lot, and it's really tiring. Could you share a couple of communication tools for managing conflict during Corona pandemic?
Yes, well, it's a very interesting question. The question of fights, right? We currently are very close to each other. It's like there's, for a good communication, we need a little bit of space. We need a little bit of air, But when we live on top of each other, inevitably these tensions will arise. And how do we communicate? Always. If you want to fight, if you want to discuss anything that is difficult, start with the positive. Alex and I developed this tool called a chat. Let's have a chat. So C stands for connect positively. H stands for hold negative. When you want to vent and say something that you don't like about your partner, start with the positive first, then share and ask, are you ready to hold all that's coming out of me. And if a partner says yes, then it's fine. No, when is the right time for us to engage without children in the same room, maybe when they're asleep or away in a different room. Then after you connect and share all the negative and hold it, then appreciate that intimacy, because when we become vulnerable, and fight is a vulnerable act, we connect deeper. And to appreciate means to validate. Our self-esteem is so low currently. We need help from all sides of our relationships. So the more you appreciate your partner, little bits, and then T stands for touch and trust. So hug more. Virginia Satir used to say, we need 4 hugs a day to survive, 8 hugs a day to maintain a good life, and 12 hugs a day to thrive. Now, how many hugs do you get per day?
Okay. Well, thank you. I think there's another question related to that, Darya, which is, although we spent a lot of time together, I thought we would have more intimacy during lockdown, but we don't have much of it. And there's also, how can I connect with my husband if he's constantly working?
Yes, it's a challenge. You see, we're all business people. We prioritize what matters, and what we measure, we get. So if we do not prioritize relationships, guess what? They will go down the drain and they will deteriorate, because it is, if we're not paying attention, it's not like riding a bicycle. We learn once and it's going to be given. We need to work on it. And everybody knows marriage is hard work. So we have a date tonight, and we use same principles how we manage our business to family life and coupledom. And some people say, yes, but I like spontaneous things. No, this sexuality, intimacy, and communication require time and space. So that needs to be provided, scheduled. And if the person works, and that's natural, first find out, so when is a good time? Not like, okay, we haven't connected for a long time, this is more stress now, Darya said we should connect. No, when is a good time for us to chat? When is a good time for us to have our meeting? Book it in a calendar and honor that, because we know that relationships are the best predictor of the quality of life. The Harvard Grant Study, one of the longest research done in the history of psychology, told us that if we want to be healthy and successful and happy, we want to look into the enriching and healthy relationships that we have with our significant others. So it's an investment. If you want to live longer and happier, instead of just taking nutrients and vitamins, it's important to invest in relationships. It will give you more years, happy years, than any exercise that you do.
True, yes. Okay, thank you, Darya. So I'm looking here. Another question is, this is actually from me. As a divorced mom, what can I do for my child with their future of their relationships, so that they have a positive view on relationships?
It's a brilliant question. The best thing we can do, and a lot of time people think that they can teach their children to have great relationships. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. The best thing we can do is to show an example of how relationships are built. And if we don't have a relationship, if you're a single parent, the best thing you could do is work on creating a relationship, or bring a relationship like a surrogate, a model of relationship that maybe is an uncle and an aunt, or a friend and their spouse, closer to your child, so they can see a functional and successful model of relationship as an example. That's how children learn. And unfortunately, we are wired to replicate unless we work on our relationships. to continue similar model through generations. So if we want something different for our children, the best thing what we can do is work on ourselves. And it's not wrong to be one parent. It's just harder. So we need to think, okay, how can I depict, how can I show a very good example to my child? Where are these role models? Who are the friends that I want to mingle with, who have great relationship that my child can learn from? And how can I relate to my ex? How can I relate to my future boyfriend or girlfriend and create a relationship that is healthier for my child, that they can learn? When a mama is happy, a child is happy. And when we learn how to respond to stress rather than react, and when we learn the congruent way of communicating, this is the best gift we can give to our children.
Wow, great, thank you. Okay, another question is, we love each other, but we're not in love anymore, I think. I fear one day he wakes up and asks for a divorce. Is there anything you can advise to prevent that?
You know, it's best to always have fences before the cliff, before we jump and then the ambulance is needed when we're sort of drop flat down. I always believe in preventative care rather than the surgery or the aftermath and aftercare when, then the divorce lawyers take up. I mean, my practice is also kind of a drop-off clinic when couples come and say, well, could you please fix my partner? Something is wrong with him or her. And that's when they realize that they need to do the majority of work. And the earlier they come to the realization that they can do something to prevent that, the better. Now, I am not in love. I love him, but I'm not in love with him. Or I love her, but I'm not in love with her. It's very much the story of those three types of circuitries of love. And there are tools how to reignite passion, how to rekindle desire. Because, as I said, desire needs space. When we have a person who's very, very close to us, we cannot see them. When we have a person too far from us, we cannot notice them. So there is kind of a very interesting dynamic when we need to have space, but we also need to have, we need to see them in their element. We need to see them in their shining, radiant state. When women and men were asked, when do you feel most turned on? And when do you want your partner the most? When do you fall in love with your partner? The majority of answers were when they are shining, when they are, especially men, when men are asked what turns you on the most, the majority of answers is when my woman is turned on. That's a very common thing. Maybe goes back to if a woman is happy, then the man is happy. The main kind of mission of a man is to make his woman happy. Now, to make a woman happy is much more complicated than that. It's more to do with how for her to care after her own needs, to understand her needs, to find the solutions, especially in female circles, because men will never satisfy women's need to connect on a deeper level, because men are less emotional creatures. So women need to connect with women, and women need to connect with men for romantic purposes and have that space for passion. And then we've seen couples when they've been together for 40, 50 years, and they had different relationships with each other throughout those years. So it's not all doomed. Then when the passion is out, there's it. Actually, it was in my case when I thought, okay, wow, after children, where's that passion? Where's that ghastly desire? And after some work, after some space creation and realization of what actually turns me on, we managed to communicate upfront and connect and create the scenarios. And it's not a Victoria's Secret that can solve it, but it's a deep work. We have our therapist, we have our psychologist and coach, and it takes some time and focus to do this work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually going to ask that next. You know, how do you apply what you share in your relationship with Alex, and how do you cope with the challenges of the pandemic and being locked in a house?
Well, with mixed results, let's say. We have, I call it the home laboratory. We test a lot of tools. Some never go outside of our house. Some I share with clients if they work very well. Alex would say he's mostly willing guinea pig for my tests. But some of them work, some of them don't. We also struggle, but we know what works. And because there's science of love, there's science of relationship, there's so much we know now. I mean, we didn't even know before 50 years how to sustain the relationship. And it took me twice. I was married before and it didn't work. So I thought, you know what? I want to defy statistics. I don't want to divorce a second time. I'd better learn how to make this relationship work. And it's tough, but we're still together. That's good news.
That's excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, Darya. I'm just kind of last looking if there are any